Welcome to Tresor Expansions. I'm Chloe Lula, the host of this show and a Tresor Club resident. With these interviews, we want to shed light on the artists closely affiliated with Tresor. Longtime legends who have released on the label across the decades, past and present regulars in the booth, and up-and-comers who are just getting their foot in the door of the club. In each conversation, I have my guest reflect on their musical influences and the songs that shaped them, as well as their connection to the sound and ethos of the Berlin institution. In this interview, I sat down with Dave Sumner, also known as Function. He's one half of the duo Sandwell District with Regis, the founder of the label Infrastructure New York, a member of the trio LSD alongside Luke Slater and Steve Bicknell, and a releasing artist on Tresor, Oscar-Ton, and legendary labels from across the world of techno. Sumner grew up in Canarsie, Brooklyn, where he had a lively musical childhood, attending his mother's frequent gatherings and block parties on his street. He told me about falling in love with music from an early age and moving to Manhattan to cut his teeth as a DJ and producer as soon as he was old enough to leave the house. He threw parties at the legendary Limelight, and in this interview, he reflects back on witnessing the rise and fall of the club kid scene as depicted in the movie Party Monster. But after years of juggling odd jobs and promoting events, Sumner reached a point where he felt like he was at a do or die moment. He was losing sight of himself and his artistry, and without a big change in his life, he was afraid the path he'd initially set out for himself might be lost forever. He moved to Berlin, released with Carl O'Connor on Sandwell District, and came out into the world as a solo artist. We discussed all of these pivotal, career-defining moments in this interview. But I have to say that the most fascinating part of talking to Dave Sumner, in this particular conversation and otherwise, is hearing how spirituality and mysticism have had such a profound impact on his music and his life. In the second part of our conversation, we dove into some of the hidden messaging that's appeared in his releases and the role that manifestation and repeating dates have played on the trajectory of his career. Spirituality has become an increasingly important part of Sumner's life, and I thoroughly enjoyed lifting the veil on some of these experiences. We dove straight in with the songs that laid the groundwork for his early musical education, and it started with Kraftwerk. Next up, Function. Hey, Dave. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Chloe. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I want to start by saying it was very fun to prep for this interview because you chose very, very sick tracks. Let's start by laying the groundwork. I want to talk about the first two records you chose, Numbers by Kraftwerk and Sweet Exorcist by Test 4.
It's Sweet Exorcist is the artist name, and Test 4 is the track title.
That's embarrassing. Okay.
It's an old record.
Test 4 by Sweet Exorcist.
Yes.
You told me that these are tied as your favorite records of all time. And listening, it strikes me how similar they are in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, they came out, the Kraftwerk Numbers and Test Tone remixes and Test 4 came out years apart, but you can hear the Kraftwerk influence in Sweet Exorcist. And Sweet Exorcist, you know, is Richard H. Kirk from Cabaret Voltaire, so he's a huge hero. And, you know, I would say I've never mixed two records together as many times as I've mixed those two records. Like, as I was growing up as a DJ, I was just obsessed with how well these records went together and how I could create different mixes with the sounds in these two tracks and the way the arrangements lined up. And I learned a lot about DJing just from playing these two records together. Like Kraftwerk Numbers it's such an obvious pick. I can actually feel Carl Regis like rolling his eyes, like, oh, talking about Kraftwerk. But it is what it is. It's my favorite record of all time. I mean, when I was a kid, growing up in Canarsie, and I think it came out in '81, and Kraftwerk Computer World is just in electronic music, hands down. It's the most influential record, and the concept of the record is about how, and they were ahead of the curve. They were predicting the future about how the home computer was going to take over our lives. And then I thought it was fascinating, completely unrelated, but like Gerald Donnell from Drexciya and did this ARPANET project where he did this album called ARPANET, where he was following up a lot of people. I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but like the concept of that record was continuing on from Kraftwerk Computer World about handheld devices, and that came out in the early 2000s. And that was, if you listen to some of the lyrics in the beginning of the ARPANET album, is talking about handheld devices and predicting the future further. I love that kind of storytelling and that sort of narrative about things. So, if you look at the cover of Kraftwerk Computer World, it is a personal computer. So it's a home computer, and the track home computer is on there. And and the thing about Kraftwerk that always fascinated me was like, everybody perceives them as this, massive, like building their own synthesizers, which they did, and they, having these like walls of modulars and always on the cusp of technology and synthesizer technology. But it's maybe a little known fact that they were actually modifying toys. There was like this Mattel Synsonics, which is the beat from Kraftwerk Numbers, is just it's a toy. And there was also like a Pocket Calculator was like this. If you look these things up, you can find them on YouTube. I'd love to talk about it, to turn people onto it, because it's so cool. If you look up on YouTube, like Mattel, like circuit bent Mattel Synsonics, you can hear what I'm talking about. And I came across this one time years ago, and I was just fascinated that, they were modifying toys that were like a Mattel, like the makers of Barbie, basically, like made this like toy drum machine with drum pads, and like they modified them. It's the beat to Kraftwerk Numbers. You're just like, oh my God. Like, also there was for Pocket Calculator, there was like this handheld like Bee Gees synthesizer. So I guess if you're interested and you search like Pocket Calculator, Bee Gees, toy synthesizer, and like Pocket Calculator, like it's made with this like little tiny Bee Gees toy synthesizer. I mean, I didn't own the record until I started DJing, so mid-late 80s, but you heard this record everywhere. Like in Brooklyn, in the environment that I grew up in. I grew up on East 80th Street and Padgett 8 in Canarsie, which East 80th Street was like this really busy 2 lanes in each direction, like main road. And we lived on the corner across the street from this big main road was this outdoor swim club called The Brook. I've talked about this in interviews before, but it's I wouldn't be who I am and if I didn't have this experience when I was young. And something like something out of a Scorsese movie, like something it seemed like the tail end of the 50s, even though it was in the late 70s and early 80s. It's something that this Matt Dillon movie, The Flamingo Kid, like it looked very picturesque, women with beehive haircuts, a lot of older Jewish women, Jewish families. It was a very Jewish neighborhood at the time. On Saturdays, they did Saturday night dance parties, and I was too young to enter, but in our backyard, we had a small swimming pool, and our backyard faced this. So my long roundabout explanation about this was that I was experiencing during the summers like an outdoor block party across the street from my house, and this is what I was hearing. From the late 70s until we moved in the early mid 80s. It was just all right there. I didn't have to go looking for it. It was like radiating from across the street.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you've talked in the past about hearing so much freestyle and disco, and I was surprised to learn that these were your early influences just because it stands in such stark contrast to the music I associate with you.
Well, I am 51 now, so it's been a long road. So
I know. So you said that your mom had a lot to do with your becoming a DJ.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Because we grew up in this very kind of close-knit Jewish community. My mother was Jewish, my father was Irish Catholic, and my mother was always organizing parties, and they used to come over and play mahjong, and and she was just a very social person. And yeah, I was a promoter also, and that was definitely influenced by her. Just gathering people and being in large groups in a community. So
well, that sounds like such a lively place to grow up in.
Yeah,
really
my childhood felt like a party, and I was just like this young kid obsessed with music. I remember winning like a dance contest when I was 6 or 7 years old at a block party, and I think that they just told me that I won the dance. I don't even think there was a dance contest. I was just
just like dancing.
I was just dancing. I was so into the music at like 6 or 7 years. They were like, "Yes, you won." And I was like, "Yes, I won."
Okay, well, the next song I want to talk about is New Millennium by Paul Mix, which came out in 93. This is a fun tune. Tell me why you chose it.
This is trance before it was really bastardized and commercialized. And so it's trance before trance.
Yeah, it came out in 93.
In 93, yeah. And this is part of the EX and Sine Wave catalog. And, Damon Wild and Sine Wave, my first record came out on Sine Wave, and Damon has been a huge influence on me and all of us. I picked this because I wanted to shine a light on Damon's work and influence on electronic music, but also on my career. And he's a bit older than I am, and he kind of took me under his wing a few different times. And this record had a huge impact on me. And if you listen to this record, you can hear where function, anticipation, and disaffected came from. And that's the main reason why I picked it. It's this kind of like transcendental, hypnotic, modulating one note. And it's amazing what we can do with just one note. I mean, this record is pretty much unknown, I'd say.
Yeah, I didn't.
I mean, it was at the time it was pretty big, but yeah, and I say unknown because I was about to compare it. It kind of came in the wake of Jam and Spoon, The Age of Love, and you can hear The Age of Love's influence on this record. Like at the moment, I'm working closely with Nastia Regal. We just announced her new album, and I'm releasing her debut on Infrastructure. And we started talking about pre-trance, trance, and then so I think she was doing like a podcast or something based in this sound, and then she started sending me some of the music that was inspiring her in this sound. And I was like, I grew up with every single record she was sending. I was like, I actually lost my record collection. That's another story, which we don't really need to get into, but like I lost all these records, and like her bringing them up, I don't even know if I would ever think about these records again. And then, we start talking about them, and then because of talking about it so much, we started working on stuff in that vein, and we're like now starting a project based in that sound, which, I mean, this is a big part of what happened with Sandwell District. Like Sandwell District in the late 2000s was about modernizing kind of old ideas. And that's what my record Isolation and Anticipation and Variance this is what it was all about. And this is what Sleep Archive was doing, which was a huge influence on, and, it's like modernizing like Pan-Sonic. We'll get to that. Okay. Yeah, that's why I picked this record, because it's transcendental sound that isn't 100% existing at the moment, and we're looking to shine a light on it. So
for me, it paints a picture of like New York nightlife, maybe the world depicted in Party Monster, kind of. And I want to talk a little bit about your time in Manhattan. I did learn that your club kid name was Overlord.
That wasn't my club kid name. Okay. It was my DJ name at the time.
Oh, it was your DJ name.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I wouldn't consider myself a club kid.
Okay. Why not stick with Overlord? What made you?
I mean, it's funny. I was always looking for the right DJ name, and at the time, I knew that wasn't the right DJ name, but it was a reflection of the times. I think there was a hard floor record called Drug Overlord. Look it up. Yeah. And I used to hear it all the time. And I think it was like a sample from the news, like talking about Pablo Escobar at the time. He's like, he's not your ordinary drug dealer. He's your drug overlord. And this was a record that you hear every week at Limelight. And it stuck with me. And, there was the promoter at the time. His name was Lord Michael. And it just seemed it fit at the time.
Yeah.
But I did know at the time that it would not always be my DJ name, because it's something that I knew was not a timeless name.
Okay. So you started throwing parties in the back room of Limelight. I think it was called Shampoo Room.
Yeah.
You said you needed a password to get into it. Can you tell me a little bit about what these parties were like?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was doing stuff in Shampoo, but I was also doing stuff on the main floor at Limelight on Thursdays. But yeah, Shampoo Room was amazing. So Limelight was in a desanctified church, or I forget what the word was for it, but it was no longer a church, but it was the building was a church. Yeah, Shampoo Room was always the back room of Limelight where you would need a password, or there was a really strict door selection at Limelight to get in, and also to get into the club itself, but then also to get into Shampoo. And
so like the club within the club.
Yeah, there's a scene from the movie Bad Lieutenant by Abel Ferrara with Harvey Keitel, which was filmed in the Shampoo Room. So if you want to see what it looks like, you could see it there. The nightclub scenes in the movie Bad Lieutenant are all filmed at Limelight. So you see the whole club working. And I mean, it's just a magical time like at Limelight. It's like I can say that I still have not experienced any. I don't know if it's because they were my first experiences in nightclubs, or because I was young, but I still feel like nothing holds a candle to it. It was just pure hedonism. Movies were made about it, like, and having front row seats to the Club Kid thing and watching Michael Alig's behavior.
That's crazy because I actually did read somewhere that you overheard him bragging about
years later,
murdering this guy
Angel. Yeah. I mean, he was out of it. Well, and that was later. That was like 96. What the era we're talking about was 91, 92. So yeah, I mean, he was clearly a narcissist and out of his mind. Yeah, all you ever heard at the club was Michael. And you see that in the movie, and it was really accurate, and he was doing outrageous things, walking through a crowd of people and just falling on everybody, or like having hepatitis and peeing in a drink and then handing it to somebody and having them drink from it and then saying, I have hepatitis. I mean, he was outrageous. And so later on, when this whole thing with Angel happened, I was at the time, so this was 96, I was living on 30th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues in Midtown Manhattan. And this is when I was working at Rogue on the 10th floor and then living on the 15th floor. And this is the apartment where this got me out of my parents' house and into New York City, and this is where I met Regis. He stayed with me with Peter Sutton, female, and their childhood friend Richard Harvey, and Carl was actually there for this also. Like, so there was a nightclub on the ground floor called Downtime. Michael Alig and Club Kids were hanging out there. It was such a wild experience, This was during the time when Angel Mendez, was it? Angel, like, he was missing, and there were stories. It was like on the cover of the Village Voice at the time, which was like the newspaper. I mean, it still exists, right? Michael Alig was so out of his head that there was a night where he was standing in front of the club, and I could overhear him saying, like, I killed him. I chopped up his body. And like a lot of people were hearing this from him, and it almost sounded unbelievable.
Wow.
But he was, so high and so out there. And this was, a few weeks or months after he was missing, and people were almost not believing him. And that's why he was kind of saying it. Like, and he was delusional.
Wow, that is such a wild story. Well, moving on.
yeah, I know that's a lot.
I want to play the next song you chose, Concentration Factor by Claude Young, which came out in 95. It is a fucking sick tune.
So good.
Did not know it. It feels very Function to me. Tell me about this one.
Yeah, I mean, Claude's a good, close old friend, and I've even talked to him about this because when we were talking about it a few years ago, I told him that when I was younger, like, and just started getting into buying and selling equipment and collecting and exploring making sounds, like I was trying to copy this record a lot, and I think that's where I learned a lot about production. I was just fascinated with this record. Actually, along the way, kind of forgot about it. And Adam X at one time said, when we were talking about Function Disaffected and Anticipation record, he was like, yeah, this sounds like it really influenced your record. And I was like, you know what, I kind of didn't consciously think about that until you've just said it, but definitely. There were other records that were very consciously influencing my sound at the time, which what we're talking about with Sandwell District. And like when I first moved to Berlin, records like Testy the Wipe and DJ Slip, Every Time Takes a While, Claude Young, Concentration Factor on DJax. I was just like fascinated, amazed at the movement of the track and the arrangement. And I was just always listening to it like, how the hell did he do this? Because it sounds very live. I guess there are edits. I don't know. I never asked Claude about it, but I know that all the Detroit guys at the time were doing a lot of, reel-to-reel and 2-track edits. And it's such a hypnotic record, and as it progresses and the turns that it takes, it's so eloquent and it still holds up.
Yeah, absolutely. So around this time, I know that you started really getting into synthesizers, into production. You developed a fascination with the ARP 2600 specifically. I don't know. Is that still part of your setup?
I still have the ARP 2600, but I was lucky enough to find an ARP 2500 modular and an ARP 2600. So I used to buy and sell a lot of gear. At a very young age, I got fascinated. This is pre-internet, and this is in the period between, like, where everything lost its value. So like in the 70s and 80s, things were worth a lot. And then things went a bit digital, not digital in terms of the way we are now, but digital synthesizers. And then, going from voltage controlled oscillators to digitally controlled oscillators. And then, the advent of the workstation, the digital workstation, and everything going digital in that regards. There was a period in the early mid-90s where everything lost its value. And I was working at a Sam Ash in Edison, New Jersey, a Sam Ash music store. And people were coming in with 303s and 808s and 909s like all the time. And at this time, I was still in school, and I was in school for music production, but there were definitely aspects in the course that were not covering what I was looking for. But, I would take to the library and take out books about vintage synthesizers and stuff like that, and was really knowledgeable about Moog, ARP, everything. And there was one time I was working at Sam Ash, and I was selling this guy a Kurzweil K2000, and I had said something like, oh, this is sounding a lot like a lot of old vintage synthesizers, and you can generate a lot of sounds that sound like old modulars. And he's like, oh, I have an ARP 2500 in my garage. And I was like, I'll buy that. And he said it was like collecting dust, and he didn't know what it was worth. And yeah, basically, long short of it, I went to his house and bought it, and he wanted $800 for it, but there was something wrong with the power supply. I said, I'll give you $400 cash, and he said, I'll help you out to the car with it. And then I went home and looked in this vintage synthesizer book that I had, and it had a price list at the back, and it was worth like 10 to 20,000. I think there was like 125 in the world. And
wow.
I kept it for a year, and it's what moved me out of my parents' house, and it was part of what got me my job at Rogue Music. Rogue Music was just such an incredible place because everyone was coming in there. The Beastie Boys were coming in. My manager at the time used to babysit Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys. So like everybody, when they came through, they were always modest. I mean, I met KRS-One, Stevie Wonder, Neil Young,
oh my God. Wow.
Richard Gere. Like,
Oh my God.
it's a fascinating time, and not only that, like down the block. I mean, we're talking about Manhattan, it's like, and during the time when Manhattan was New York City and it wasn't in the outer boroughs, so like, it's just all kinds of things like this were just, just like right there at your fingertips. And they had this consignment system. So when I was buying and selling gear at Rogue Music, I was consigning stuff so often that they offered me a job. I was always asking for a job. Clay, my manager there, I developed this relationship with him where I was buying and selling and consigning things so often. And then I was always asking him. And I was always working really hard. Like, I had this vision. It was very clear. I'm like, I'm moving to Manhattan and doing this. Basically manifested this apartment. And so like Damon Wild was coming into Rogue Music all the time, Joey Beltram. And this is how I developed this relationship with Damon. And, it's this kind of thing where when I was working at Rogue, when I would have a lunch break, I would bring, if somebody came in like Damon or Beltram or Steve Stoll, I would bring them up the elevator to the 15th floor to my apartment and play them tracks and just like hang out and develop relationships. And this is what helped springboard my whole career as Function.
Interesting. Well, I want to move on to Berlin phase of your life. My understanding is that promoting parties in New York kind of took over your life for a while. You have said in a past interview that you kind of lost sight of your artistry for a little bit, and you decided you were at a crossroads where you hadn't pushed things to the point where you needed to, so you decided to move to Berlin, and you've called it a do or die moment. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a do or die moment. When I moved here, I promised to not do events because I definitely, I don't regret being a promoter. I learned a lot from it, but I definitely lost sight of myself as an artist, as a DJ. Even though I was the resident DJ at my events, I got so caught up in the local scene that I lost sight of my kind of global vision. And I was treading water. It's like it's hard to survive in New York. I mean, if we think if I thought it was hard then, it's even more difficult. So
this was
now.
Like around 2007 or so.
Yeah. But this is going on the whole entire time, and it was so difficult for me to survive that I then moved to England to work at Integral Music and record with Regis and doing Portion Reform and other various anonymous projects and stuff like that. And then that contrast of moving from Midtown Manhattan to Hale Zone in the West Midlands wasn't exactly working the way that I planned it. I was treading water. I was struggling to survive. I had like 5 jobs or something. I was like appraising real estate. I was doing some executive driving, just like things to keep me out of an office cubicle. I mean, prior to that, I was having like day jobs. Like I was working at Europa Disc for a while, which is a pressing plant that used to be in Tribeca on the corner of Canal and Varick. I was always keeping myself in the game somehow and having music related jobs. And if I didn't, then I wanted a free spirited job that gave me freedom and kept me out of an office cubicle. I was in a relationship at the time that we were both struggling, and it wasn't. She was in fashion, and I was in music, and we broke up, and that was the big influence that pushed me. It was heartbreaking at the time, but if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am. And also Carl Regis and his ex at the time, Claudia, they were also really supportive of me and just there for me in a way where we were always on the phone and we were always talking about kind of like the status quo and where things were going musically and of course about gear and making music. But it's amazing. This is the one friendship in my life that, you meet somebody and you're just like, this is somehow cosmic. you know. And I've had that with a lot of people, but when I first met Carl, I was just like, this is weird. I don't know what I'm feeling right now, but I know this person somehow, even though he's from, and then we just instantly became friends, and we were talking on the phone all the time. And that's what led to when I was going through this tumultuous time, we were also observing everybody starting to migrate to Berlin.
Well, I mean, so I wanted to, and maybe you're about to share this, but I think like right after you moved, you ended up releasing on Sandwell District. It was your debut EP as Function on Sandwell District.
So I had gone over in August of 2007 to stay with Carl. I had played him this music. We had been influenced by Sleep Archive for a few years at this point, but also Mika Vanyo and Sacco Records and Pansonic and also Richie Houghton and Plastic Man. And, you know, this was a time where harder, faster techno was kind of dying its death, and minimal was coming in. And yeah, I moved to Berlin on November 29th, 2007, and this record came out, and this record changed my life. And it was my first release on Sandwell District, and it got DJ Mag Techno 12-inch of the month. And then all of a sudden, all the struggle disappeared, and money and abundance and success and attention, it all came on this day with this record. And yeah, I moved to Berlin and I hit the ground running. But I would say that I manifested it. You know, through my spiritual awakening process, learned a lot more about manifestation, things that I wasn't thinking about at the time. But now when I look back, it was part of the way I was operating. I just wasn't completely conscious of it. And I think that's part of what a spiritual awakening process is awakening and these things becoming more, you becoming more conscious of these things. Sandwell District and that record in particular, it's like a huge part of my success and the transformation I needed to go forward. Carl and I were always having these conversations about this change, and we were somehow embracing it, but not completely. And then we heard Sleep Archive, and that changed everything for us. And it really had a huge influence on the way I was producing. And I just loved this hypnotic aspect of, you know, tapping into the transcendental state through hypnotic, repetitive music. And that is what the kind of blueprint was becoming for Sandwell District and my sound.
mean, it really flirts with like signal interference and noise and electricity and like these through lines that it really put the pieces together for me when I listen to your work. Like, it's very much focused on the physicality of sound rather than like traditional markers of melody or rhythm necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, Roger Sleep Archive is a very, very fascinating person. I guess he's not really involved in music anymore. I think he moved to Finland or whatever, but he's kind of primarily a noise artist that started flirting with electronic music. But I think it was very largely influenced by T++, Torsten from Hardwax, and Roger was working there, I guess in the mail order department. And so there was a time, I think in 2004, when I was in town doing some shows. I was staying with Regis, and we had been having these conversations about the change and transformation in music and minimal taking over, and we weren't quite convinced about the minimal sound. And then we walked into Hardwax, and Torsten gave us a copy of Elephant Island, and he put it on, and we just looked at each other and we're like, okay, this is what we're talking about. Very, very few times in my life, like, talking about like Test 4 and Kraftwerk and stuff, and like early Aphex Twin and Autechre and these like kind of pivotal groundbreaking electronic music. This was in 2004. I hadn't heard something groundbreaking in a long time, and this record crystallized everything. And we just looked at each other, and it's interesting. I think I've talked about this in the Resident Advisor Sandwell District piece when we were splitting up years ago. There was this one single day where so many things crystallized for the future. It's like we walked into Hardwax, we heard this record, I bought this record, I played it at Tresor later that night, and then Carl was behind me organizing a microphone, and I could see and feel him doing something, and I didn't know quite what it was. And then I think I was mixing Sleep Archive Elephant Island with Regis Guiltless, and then he organizes the mic and starts like punk singing Buddy Holly Peggy Sue over the top. And if you look at what we did or what happened with Sandwell District and the whole post-punk sound, like Soundra Electronics, and what Carl and Juan with Silent Servant were doing together, and also Carl on his own, and Blackest Ever Black, and it's just like all there in that one moment.
Wow.
Going forward, it's amazing, these kind of zeitgeist moments that we have in our lives and our careers, that it just takes a flash of a second for it to all come together. And it's usually improvised and not at all thought about, and they could just like, it could really influence the rest of your life. It's like it's almost like it didn't come from us, like it came from somewhere else.
I mean, I've listened to your music for a long time. You have a lot of sound signatures that are like motifs that return in a lot of your work. There's like this distinct pad sound. The other thing that's very distinct about your work is these radio frequency sounds that they have formed the basis of some of your tracks, but I also hear you sprinkle them into like DJ sets and stuff. And you mentioned that you wanted to talk about this, and I find it very fascinating. So can you tell me about the Conet Project? Yeah,
the Conet Project on Erdial Records came out in like 1997. I was actually turned on to it by Carl Meyer, who is a very close friend of Carl's and myself, and I also thought it was cool to select something that was just a non-traditional record, because and the story behind this record is the Conet Project is basically a collection. It's a 5 CD set of a collection of shortwave radio transmissions that were basically wartime communications between military operations and snipers. And the only person that could crack the code in this message was the assassin.
5, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 2, 5, 7, 2, 5, 7, 2, 5, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0.
So these radio transmissions still exist on certain frequencies in shortwave radio, and even from wartime, and they're still there. But it's just static and numbers, and it's counting with coded messages to assassins, like in different languages. So there's, Chinese, Korean, German, Spanish, English, you name it. When it came out, this band Wilco immediately sampled it, and it became like this huge kind of landmark intellectual properties case where so Akin Fernandez, the owner of Erdl Discs, like sued Wilco because they sampled the Conet project, and he won the case. So I started using this in my DJ sets, and I immediately loved the texture and I still, it's like, I maybe overuse it, and I've been using it for so long, but it's become part of my signature.
Totally,
so that I for me, it never gets old. And it's a 5 CD box set, so there's so many of these recordings. And so the thing is that I started getting so obsessed with it, I wanted to incorporate it into my music. But I had so much respect for Akin Fernandez, Erdl Discs, and this story and this case that I was like, I can't sample this. I think now he's not holding trademark, or like it's available online and you can use it, but I still would never sample it because of this story. So what I did with my ex-partner, Stephanie Parno, and Cramble Irvine, artist on Infrastructure, they actually, because this is a coded message.
Okay, I feel like you're reading my mind right now, because I was about to ask you about, is it the track of yours called Zollensender?
Yeah, Zollensender.
On Existence, because I was going to ask you if there's a significance in the numbers, because
Yes.
I know that you have a deep interest in numerology.
Yeah, actually, I've never really talked about this. So there's like hidden messages in Existence in particular, but so I won't crack the code, but I will say that if you're interested, you can crack the code, because it's embedded in artwork and hidden in different releases. Like there's a hidden track on my record on Our Roses label O, a Subject F Transcendence, which in itself is part of the code.
What do you mean it's a hidden track?
Function Subject F Transcendence on O is a 2-track record, but if you hold the record up to the light, you can find on the B side, you have to pick the needle up. So I've seen online, people have found it. People have found it. But so the B side of the record will end to a run out groove. But if you pick the record up and you hold it to the light, you can see that there's another small short track. So you have to lift the needle up and move it. Otherwise, the record won't play into it. So you have to lift the needle up and go to this small track. And there is the number station that Stephanie and Campbell created for me. But that number station appears on a lot of my music. So I've then incorporated my sound design into like Zollensender, for instance, but all over Existence, these numbers keep appearing. And if you look at the artwork for Existence, you'll find you have to really look into it, but you'll find the crack for the coded message.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
I'm going to spend some time on this later.
Yeah. No, I encourage people, and some people have found it. Yeah, I mean, I was so fascinated by the Conet project and how mysterious the whole thing is, that for 50, 60 years, these things exist on radio frequencies and you don't know what it's saying, And it's a bit macabre, it's about an assassin killing somebody, but it's such a great idea.
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to play with one last tune, because I always like to play something from the artist's discography. I chose Existence, which is your album on Tresor. I specifically wanted to play Sagittarius A, just because it's a very beautiful song, like very light. And you have said, and you kind of just repeated, that this album is a biography of sorts. Like
Autobiography, yeah.
Yeah. It reflects a lot of the styles you love beyond techno. You have said that it offers thought experiments on the role of identity and spirituality after a lifetime of upheaval and trauma. You don't have to get into detail, but maybe, as we close out the interview, can you tell us a little bit about this album?
Yeah, I mean, Sagittarius A right ascension is, I'm a Sagittarius, so it became autobiographical, and I thought that this is where I entered this life from, so that's where the title came from. Existence is part of where my spiritual awakening started, and I had some really fascinating cosmic things uncover in the process of this album, the release of it. And it was the first time I did an AV show. So it was a live AV show, the big screen at Atonal. And this was me the first time even attempting to work with something visual from myself. Like Sandwell District was always Juan and Claudia, and we always put our input in. But this was the first time where I was really working on it myself. And like Carl and I, when we were doing Sandwell District and Where Next, like everything was always grayscale and black and white. And we always talked about The Wizard of Oz going from black and white into color, and that we would do that with Sandwell District, but we never actually did that. So this was me going from black and white into color, because it's very, very vivid color. And so I found this content of all this public access cable TV from Manhattan Cable from the 80s and 90s. It was stuff that was originally started by Glenn O'Brien, I think, TV Party, which was like Blondie and Klaus Nomi and Andy Warhol and like all this early stuff, but a lot of freaky stuff, It's just like, Andy Warhol had a station, had a channel, and so I had this idea of using this stuff, and then I started working on it in Ableton and cutting it up, and I made this kind of promo video on my own. And then I chose this video of a woman reading tarot cards, and it says like psychic masters, no guaranteed futures. And then she starts and she's reading tarot cards. And this is from something from the 80s, but she's like reading tarot cards, and she's like, this year is going to be terrible for you. No, sorry, my mistake. Next year. And it's like the pandemic was the next year. And it also had this November 29th date, which is the date that I moved to Berlin and when Isolation came out. And this is a reoccurring number or date in my life that has really deep mystical significance to me. But like, again, I don't like to talk about this stuff publicly, but it's just fascinating that this is all been tied into my like I've kind of found that behind my release dates and the catalog numbers of records, and like it's all these like weird spiritual messages that are significant to me that have been unveiled through my experience and consciousness. And it's changed my life, actually. But it's weird because it's always been there, and then I didn't discover it until years later. And it just actually shows me a lot about the power of the unconscious mind. And, music is a vehicle for this, and so is creativity. And, but that's this somewhat roundabout story about Sagittarius A. But Sagittarius A is you can hear it's very influenced by Kraftwerk. So I guess we've come full circle on that. Yeah.
On that note, you mentioned, you're reviving Infrastructure, your label. You have this record coming out with Nastia Regal.
Very exciting.
What else is on the horizon?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the pipeline. It's for Infrastructure next year. And next year is my 30-year anniversary since my first release on Sine Wave. So still figuring out exactly how we're going to go about doing that. And I don't know if we want to make a spectacle out of that anniversary or what, but there is a lot in the pipeline. Reissues, remixes, new music. I'll admit, I got coasting for a bit, but I had a spiritual awakening which demanded my attention, so I stepped back from music a lot in the last few years after the pandemic. But losing one has shown me that there's how fragile life is, and there's no time to waste. So, yeah, that's been inspiring to. It was a tragic loss, and it hasn't been easy, but very eye-opening.
Well, we're all happy that you're still making music.
This is, in a lot of ways, I feel like I've only just begun, so.
Dave, thank you so much for doing this with me. It's been a long time coming.
Thank you for having me. It's
of course.
Real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another installment of Tresor Expansions. In this episode, you heard Test 4 by Sweet Exorcist, Numbers by Kraftwerk, New Millennium, the Transatlantic remix by Paul Mix, Concentration Factor by Claude Young, Reykjavik by Function, Elephant Island by Sleep Archive, Sagittarius A, Right Ascension by Function. If you liked what you heard, please check out the previous interviews in the series with Silent Servant, Helena Hoff, Rode Medell, Lady Starlight, and Alan Oldham. You can find them on the Refuge Worldwide website, as well as by searching for Tresor Expansions on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to audio. We'll be back again. See you next time.